Imagine having the time and money to follow your passions and live life on your own terms. Welcome to Podcasting Mastery, where you'll learn the secrets of podcasting your way to a stress-free lifestyle. Let's grab a cool tropical drink and then join James, Kimberly, and the Turtle in the Secret Beach Hut Studio.
Yes, this is James Martell along with Kimberly Juchnowski.
Hello.
And we are tucked into the Secret Beach Hut Studio, and we are so glad you've decided to join us. In the last episode, we talked with Ed Keay-Smith of the Business Marketing Show, who said something very interesting, which was my podcast has changed the relationship I have with prospects and clients. Very interesting thing to say, and it's something that I've had a great deal of experience with as well. So this week, we will be continuing that conversation so we can continue talking about developing a lifestyle business so we can all spend less time doing business and more time enjoying our families, more time traveling, and more time doing all of the things that matter to us most. It's for these reasons we focus on strategies for both developing a passive monthly income stream and passive ways of developing new clients and customers, in this case for your coaching or consulting business. Kimberly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, James?
Very well, thank you. I do understand we have a fair chunk to talk about today. I know we're going to talk a little bit about, or talk to coaches and consultants.
Yes, we sure do. We are going to talk about how business coaches and consultants can harness the power of a podcast to land new clients by taking a deeper look at our conversation with Ed Keay-Smith of the Business Marketing Show, who talked about how his podcast changed the relationship he has with prospects and clients. And we'll talk about how Ed successfully monetizes his podcast without the need for sponsors, which is a way that most podcasters go about it.
Absolutely. And it's a way I think a lot of people that are looking at starting a podcast think that that's the only way that we monetize podcasts. And it's actually not true. It's I've actually monetized my podcast in many, many ways. And Ed doesn't have a single sponsor to his show. So very interesting, and neither do we for the Podcasting Mastery podcast. With my affiliate Buzz podcast, we have sponsors, and we've had them for years, but we've also monetized that in many, many ways as well. So I thought it'd be really good to dive into all of this and really kind of pull back the curtains on how we make money with our podcast, with a focus in this particular episode on Ed Keay-Smith, because he really that's a pretty good thing to say, that, we don't, when he says my podcast changed the relationship I have with prospects and clients, which we're going to wander that into how that actually generates revenue for Ed and his partner Brendan. Now, before we get started here, why don't you push the button and play a little music as usual to set the mood for the show, which of course is to work less, earn more, and swim with the turtles. Before we get into talking about actually harnessing the power of a podcast to land new clients, I found a very interesting article, and I read you the headline just before we got started here, and you go, what? And it basically says Apple TV has that podcasting app you probably didn't want. And
my first reaction was, why wouldn't they want it?
Absolutely. It's a great thing, and it follows along the same idea that Apple did with the iPhone in the most recent update with the iPhone, I think it's 6, where they built the podcasting app directly into the phone and they put it on the front screen and you can't even delete it. So it's in your face whether you like it or not. Now, from a podcasting or a podcaster's point of view, I think this is a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
People that, even those that don't know what a podcast is, if all of a sudden you've got 200 million iPhones that went out last year, and all of a sudden they've got a podcast app right on the front screen of their phone, if they don't know what a podcast is, they're probably going to find out pretty quickly. And if they don't have the ability to delete it, of course, it's going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
So this article actually talks about that a little bit, but it's really what it's talking about. Apple TV has now put that same podcasting app directly onto the screen when you log into Apple TV. So along with Netflix and HBO, YouTube, Vimeo, all the regular apps that you can see up front, right in the middle of them all, literally dead center, is the purple podcasting app.
I wonder how the other apps feel. Maybe they're like, oh, this is going to dilute our subscription base or the way that people are digesting our content because now they have another option, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And let's face it, with the iPhones and the Google Androids, I was looking at an article that it said in the end of, now we're just going into 2016, so I haven't looked at the 2015 stats yet, but I remember seeing the stats for 2014 where Apple had shipped out 192 million iPhones. And I'm thinking, ooh, there's a podcast player in everybody's pocket. And then Google, same year, 2014, they had just over 1 billion phones shipped from all the various manufacturers with the Google Android operating system, all, of course, with podcasting apps in them. In that particular case, they're not forced on you, but there's still an abundance of podcasting apps out there now. So there's a total of over 1.2 billion phones now that either have a podcasting app in it or the ability to add one. And now we see with Apple TV, I don't know how many people have Apple TV. I don't really.
Lots.
Do they?
Yeah, I'm not an Apple head, so I don't have it and I don't use it. But basically every house I go to, they're using Apple TV.
Okay.
If they are Mac users.
Okay.
Yeah.
If they've drank the Mac or the Apple Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Well, it seamlessly integrates all of your content and everything, right? So you can control your Apple TV from your phone and everything's on there.
Yeah,
so.
that's very cool. I know Phil, buddy of mine, he's got the little Apple Air, the little white router, I guess, sits in the middle, talks to everything. He's a total Apple guy. He loves it. He's got anything that new comes along from Apple, he buys it.
Yeah.
So whether he likes it or not, his Apple TV then is going to have a podcast app.
Which is very cool.
Right
I think Apple TV is great, though, because, I mean, it makes it easy access, right?
Oh,
you don't have to go to your phone to do the podcast. You don't have to go to a different tablet to do the Netflix. It's all right there for you.
Yeah.
So it's a hugely beneficial thing.
Well, and then you combine this with, you've got the apps in the phones. You've got the Apple TV on the go with the podcast player built right into it. I do know Apple's CarPlay also has their app built right into it, into the dashboard of the cars that were being shipped since the beginning of 2015. A lot of cars now have the Apple CarPlay player right in the dashboard. Basically, it's like having an iPad embedded in your dash. And then Google, with their version of the Apple CarPlay, same idea. The Google...
Wasn't it iHeartRadio that put it in? Or
No, it was Google Android Auto. There you go, Android Auto. And there's a great article that says Android Auto was everywhere at the North American Car Show, International Car Show in 2015. And they got a great picture of it in a BMW where you've got the full on screen where you can push for the phone, you can push for music, maps, messages, video. Then there's a button for BMW. Then there's the podcast player, and then there's Spotify. So again, right front and center. So podcasting, I can see, has really really starting to arrive, and it's very interesting. And it's been interesting for me to watch this kind of come into being in the last couple of years, watching this whole thing develop over the last 12 years. So it's in our pockets, it's in our cars, it's in our televisions. Of course, we can access podcasts through our tablets, through our computers, whether it be a desktop or a laptop. Seems to be pretty much, at this point, still a little bit early adopting, but within a couple of years, this is going to be full on everywhere. So it gives anybody who's thinking about starting a podcast to really get a head start and to really be able to position themselves. So when this thing really does launch, it's going to be quite something to see. Not to take away from it now, because we got 1 billion podcast subscribers in iTunes and so on. There's a huge market now, but there's going to be some exponential growth coming up, I have a feeling.
Definitely. Okay, I see we're actually time up against a very short break here. When we return, we'll talk about how to harness the power of a podcast to land new clients by focusing on 4 big reasons why Ed Keay-Smith and Brennan Tooley launched the Business Marketing Show. So don't go away, and we'll be right back.
More Podcasting Mastery with James and Kimberly from the Secret Beach Hut Studio after this.
Is your website out of date? Is it mobile friendly? Why not let us design your website and we'll make sure it looks the way it should on all platforms and devices, including iPhones, iPads, and other smartphones and tablets. We'll even optimize your site for search engines and make it easy for you to share your content and products on social sites such as Facebook and Twitter with built-in sharing features. For more information and to schedule your no-obligation free consultation, go to podcastingmastery.com/website. Once again, that's www.podcastingmastery.com/website.
Would you love to spend less time doing business and more time enjoying your family, more time traveling, and more time doing all of the things that matter to you most? Whether you're looking to develop a passive monthly income stream or you're looking for passive ways of generating new clients and customers for your business, James Martell's free podcasting webinar is the place to start. James Martell, an 11-year podcasting veteran, will show you how to quickly and easily launch a podcast that will impress all who hear it to attract all of the clients and customers you need, and how to do it all in less than 1 hour a week using equipment you already own. Register now for this lifestyle and business-changing webinar at podcastingmastery.com/webinar. We'll see you there. Once again, that's www.podcastingmastery.com/webinar. Now back to Podcasting Mastery from the Secret Beach Hut Studio.
Yes, I am here with my co-host, James Martell. We're talking about how business coaches and consultants can harness the power of a podcast to land new clients. James, Ed talked about the 4 big reasons. This was in our last podcast episode. The 4 big reasons he got together with his business partner, Brennan, to launch the Business Marketing Show. Why don't you kick it off by giving us a little background on Ed?
Ed Keay-Smith is a guy that I met about 10 or 11 years ago in, I believe it was Chicago at the Internet Marketing Summit with Ken. It was the Internet. I believe it was the Internet Marketing Summit. That was where we met briefly, and then we kind of stayed in touch. And I ended up meeting with him again a couple years later at Commission Junction University in beautiful Santa Barbara, California, where we kind of really got to know each other a little bit more. And he had his wife there, and Arlene was there, and we kind of got to know each other. And we ended up keeping in touch, and we've become friends over the years. And he is, which is interesting, and just goes to show how small this world is getting, because he lives in Australia. And we live in Canada, of course, and that's a long way away. We call it the land down under for a reason, because they are literally directly, if we could go through the earth, we're probably going to come out somewhere close to them. So he's definitely a long way away. But I've got to know Ed over the years. I've never met Brendan, but with Ed, he runs a very successful service-based internet business in Australia, where they offer SEO services, and he's a certified Google AdWords expert, and he's a domainer, meaning he buys and sells domain names for profit. And he's got a team of about 13 people that work for him. And Brendan has his own business. They don't even live in the same city, but they come together and collaborate on their podcast. And you can imagine with a little team of 13 people, graphic designer, SEO specialists, people who specialize in Google AdWords, and all the various services that they offer, website development. He's got to keep pretty busy to keep clients coming through the door so he can keep his team actively working and not having to lay people off. So, it's a pretty big commitment for him. And just an all-around great guy. And he was up here a few years ago in Vancouver with his wife. They had literally taken 7 months off, and they were going to go on a world tour with his wife Lois and his daughter Sasha. And they ended up in Vancouver for a week. And, of course, that's where we live, just in the suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia. So we get to hang out, took him to Stanley Park and out for dinner, and just did a bunch of fun things. But so we've really had a chance to get to know him. And I've interviewed him a number of times over the years on my Affiliate Buzz podcast, and we've just kind of connected. Good guy, business guy, great family man, really good all-around guy. So with that in mind, he started a podcast about domaining, which he talked about in our last episode. but they also started the business marketing show. And in that particular case, he just kind of, in fact, I forgot to even have a look at how many episodes he has, but he's got quite a number of episodes. It's a great show, but I thought it was the way he positioned why they started it. I thought it was very, very interesting, because we've had a chance to experience a lot of the benefits that Ed has mentioned as well. So, that's basically it. He's just a good guy, business guy. He's like many other coaches and consultants. He has a business that's how he makes his living. And he had a chance to talk about his podcast.
Okay, so you just touched on how interesting it is, the reasons why he started his podcast. So let's dissect the 4 big reasons why Ed and Brennan started their podcasts, starting with number 1, which is authority building.
Yeah, that's what he started off with when we asked him the question, authority building. And he mentioned that he wanted to start a podcast, or he uses his podcast to demonstrate their expertise. So when listeners hear them on the show, it becomes the aha moment. Of course, these guys know what they're talking about. Yes, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh yeah. So they quickly become perceived as an authority or an expert just by the very nature of having a podcast. It's we know you and I talk about it a lot. A podcast is the ultimate business card, because people automatically think you're an expert, because if you weren't an expert, why do you have your own show on the subject?
Yeah, and I think it helps that you can definitely get more content across to your visitor or listener through a podcast rather than just on your business website or through a blog post or a pitch or an email series. So when you're podcasting, when you're having a conversation about a topic that's relevant to a prospective client, you're really getting deep into the conversation, and you're sharing a lot more than you ever could in just a simple pitch, right?
That's true.
And they're wanting to hear it. It's not you pitching them. You're just sharing the information, and they're coming back for more. They're craving it.
You bet. And when he said the podcast has changed the relationship that I have with my prospects and clients, I thought, you know what, that's true. And in my particular case, it's been very similar. Ed said, because they're listening to you on the show, it gives you that instant credibility, because as you just mentioned, you get to spend time with them, unlike an email. And I've sent out probably, millions and millions of emails over the years. And you can connect with people through email. There's no question about that. But it pales in comparison to be able to sit and spend 30 minutes with somebody chatting or listening in on a podcast and hearing the nuances of the voice and hearing all the little aha moments. And this was interesting, and bringing on a cool guest and talking about industry news. You really do get a connection really quite quickly.
Yeah, they warm up to you also, because when you're listening to somebody speak, there's a deeper connection there. It's more on a personal level, and depending on where they're listening to the podcast, they're bringing you into their personal space. So once they're ready to take the next step and buy a product or a service from you, they're most likely to be a very warm lead at that point.
That's true. That's very true. And when it comes to selling, shortening up the sales cycle, I know is a hot button for coaches and consultants. I do a lot of coaching myself. I do a lot of consulting myself. And in Ed's case, exactly the same, where if you had to start from the very beginning with a cold, and I say cold, I don't mean cold as in not nice. I mean cold, there's no relationship at all with the prospect. They don't know you. They don't trust you. They don't know much about you or what you offer. There's quite a curve that you have to get through in that conversation just to get them relaxed and listening and starting to trust you and opening up to the presentation and maybe giving you some more information that you need to help them. A lot of that actually goes away when the phone rings, because they've already been listening to your show. They already realize, hey, this guy's demonstrating their expertise. They clearly know what they're talking about. He must be an authority. It's a great show. I like what I'm hearing. He sounds like a really nice guy. Why don't we give him a call? Yeah. And Ed talked about that. We won't get into, you can listen to the previous episode 13, and I encourage you listeners to do so. But that's really the way it is. When somebody phones you at the office, I had a call the other day from a very nice lady down in the U.S., and within 30 seconds we hit it off. because she's been listening to the show. She already knows us. She knows my wife. She knows the products and services that we offer. And it's just a warm, friendly conversation where you don't have all of this warming up in the beginning, because that's for the most part done. Usually by the time they call, because you've done, as Ed said, authority building, they're so far down the line that it just shortens that sales cycle so nicely.
Yeah, and especially with yours and Arlene's case, it's a perfect example. I mean, she's your co-host on The Buzz. Somebody calls in for a service and she answers the phone. So, I mean, it's pretty familiar. Well, it's got to be pretty comfy for the person on the other.
Well, and you know, and podcasters experience this all the time, because you do get a little bit of stardom. Really, you do. Yeah. And I know when Arlene, because that's exactly what happens. Somebody phones because they've been listening to Arlene for weeks or months or years on our other podcast, and Arlene answers the phone and they're like, "Oh." You hear this pause, right? Is this Arlene Martell? and it's just the way we are. I mean, if you hear a personality on TV or the radio, or you see them in a film or a television show, you kind of look up to them. And podcasting has a little bit of that going on as well. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
So let's move on to the reason number 2 is to save time.
Yeah, Ed talked about this a lot. He says the questions they get as a business are very repetitive, over and over and over again. And they decided to put a series of podcast episodes together. And really, usually a podcast episode talks about a particular problem that a client, what we call your ideal client, might have. You'll make a list of problems, and every one of those problems can become an episode. And Ed does the same, where they put together a list of episodes so that when somebody asks a particular question, he could say, "Hey, we have a podcast episode, or we have an episode on that. Let me send it to you." And it saves them a tremendous amount of time trying to explain the same thing over and over and over again. And I've experienced myself.
Yes, it's something that you've used actually with your own business, with Jam Media.
Do it all the time. Somebody calls me up about something. I've got, with the Affiliate Buzz, we've got 408 or 10 episodes. They can barely ask me anything, and I can say, you know what? I got a podcast. First of all, let me answer your question here, but let me also send you a podcast.
Yeah.
And give me your email. So there's a great way to gather up an email. I put them on my list, so now they're going to get a little follow-up sequence, and they're going to get that episode to them where we get into much more detail, and you can spend 30 minutes with them, and you've really had a chance to think through the answer a little bit better, because sometimes when you just answer the phone, you're busy, you're in the middle of something else, and maybe you just don't deliver the answer quite like you could in a podcast that you've had a chance to sit down and really think through and put some production quality to it.
Yeah. And not only does it save time for the business owner, the podcaster, it saves time for the person on the other end who's receiving the content. Because, you can get an email and say, "Oh, I don't have time to open that up or read it." And it gets passed over and passed over and passed over. But people enjoy listening to conversations, and people generally enjoy listening to podcasts, even if they haven't listened to one before. Once they press play, it is a good experience, and they can take it wherever they want. They could listen to it in their car and all these different ways of digesting that. So it actually makes it easier for the person who's inquiring about the service as well.
It really does. And on top of that, and we talked about it with the Apple story at the top, with the iPhones and the Androids and the tablets and all the various ways they can listen to your show. In addition to that, it really saves not only time for us as podcasters, but the person that's listening to it usually has somebody else they got to run it by as well. Mm-hmm. I got to run this by my partner. And as any of us in marketing, anytime if we haven't got both decision makers in the room and you hear that at the end of it, saying, "Oh," because you know they're not going to be able to
explain it the same way that you just did.
Exactly. And then they can just pass the podcast on to them, and they can get a listen and say, "Oh, okay, let's do this."
Your message stays intact.
It does.
Yeah. So big reason number 3, get the word out.
Yeah. Getting the word out. That's what Ed said. And it's a great way for a lot of people to hear your message. And if you think about it, one of the things I always think about when I'm doing an episode is this episode is going to be in all the podcasting directories in all kinds of different places. And it really does allow me to organize a presentation, which really a podcast is a presentation of sorts, and then scatter it all over the internet and put it in places where I know my ideal customers are hanging out and looking for this type of information, whether it be in social media or the podcast directories or any one of 10 different places. And you actually coaxed this out of him when you asked him in the last episode, where do you publish your weekly show? Because an episode can be put in a lot of locations. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, each time you publish an episode, it doesn't just go on your website, or it doesn't just go on one podcasting platform. For the most part, I mean, maybe if you're inexperienced and you're not quite sure how to get it out, then yes, a lot of people start out just going with iTunes, just going with Stitcher or something like that. But really, each episode that you creates on average about 10 pieces of content, unique content across the internet, whether it be on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Podbean, those types of platforms. You can put on SoundCloud, all who have their own audiences that you're tapping into. So an iTunes listener may not be the same as a Stitcher listener, but you're reaching both audiences with the same content, which is great. Also things like social media, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, Twitter, of course, all of your social media accounts goes out to all of those. And each of those also have a different audience. Somebody might be more inclined to Twitter for conversations. Somebody might be more inclined to Facebook because of the types of content that's shared there. So right there's another 4 or 5 pieces of content. And then, of course, your newsletter that goes out to your own email list. And in the case that you would have a guest on that you're speaking with, it would be with their newsletter list as well. Oftentimes, you'd like to encourage your list or your guests to share it with their listeners or their viewers or their visitors, people of interest as well. So you're really getting in front of a lot of people very quickly just from one episode. Whereas a blog post, something like that, or just a single email offering a service or explaining a service may only go one place.
That's true. And a lot of people will ask me, what's the difference between blogging and podcasting? Well, there's a lot of similarities. You have to organize the content for the blog, and not to take away from blogging. Blogging is great. But you can take that same information and also make it into a podcast, which also gets added to your site, as you said, and 10 other places.
Yeah. And this isn't really, sorry to cut you off, it's not really discounting blogging, because along with our podcasts, we definitely have the blogging part. In addition, in our show notes, we do a full article. It goes on our blog. It's what feeds our blog. And our blog also feeds our social media and things like that. So it does all tie in. But if you had audio versus just blog, that's what we're talking about here. Yeah, and you take a look at these podcasting directories. I just decided to open up where you mentioned it. You mentioned Spreaker, and Spreaker's Spreaker, and that's speaker, like speaking, speaker with an R, Spreaker. I found these guys not too long ago, a couple years ago now, and you mentioned as well built-in audiences. And that's one thing we need to realize as podcasters. It's not all about Google as a podcaster, because all of these podcasting directories have built-in audiences that have nothing to do with Google. There's people that are on these sites like iTunes, 1 billion subscribers, iHeartRadio, 245 million monthly listeners, and so on. And Spreaker, I add my episodes to Spreaker, and I'm looking at the stats, 46,324 plays of my podcast there, and I don't promote it. All I do is, I don't even upload it here. I connect my website to Spreaker, so when I update my website, Spreaker updates automatically, and I've had 46,000 people here, or 46,000 plays of my episodes here on Spreaker alone. Yeah, and that's just the Spreaker audience. And that's not, and your show's going to iTunes and all these other places too. Exactly. So when you take the stats from everything, exactly, really adds up. Okay, let's move on to number 4 here, land new clients. This is the big one, and this is where Ed came in again, and he said, a lot of people try to monetize their podcast or make money with their podcast by going out and finding sponsors or making money directly from the podcast, meaning you're going to sell advertisements in the show. And we call that direct revenue. And then he went on to say, or we can monetize our podcast by promoting who we are and what we offer. So using it as an advertising vehicle of your own,
And this is interesting, and this is kind of a sidebar here. I was reading an article on podcasting the other day that talks about the advertisers are throwing millions at podcasters because it's so intimate, it's becoming so big. But you got to pull out your credit card if you want to go advertise on somebody's podcast. I'm thinking that's a great idea, and don't discount that at all. That's a great thing to do. But if you don't have your own show already, start one of your own shows as well, because now you can be your own best advertiser.
Yeah.
Just by having your own show. It's kind of a sidebar. But interestingly enough, Ed says people, after they listen, a lot of times they want to take advantage of our services.
Yep. Which is actually, I'm going to add a good point here that you're talking about how people like to buy once they've listened. Midroll, which is a huge podcasting advertising platform, they have some very interesting stats on that. And one of them, I'm looking at right here, is 64% of the people of listeners buy products from a podcast ad.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, that's a huge percentage. So, I mean, people get comfortable with listening to your show. They get comfortable with who you are and your sponsors. And in this case, if you're sponsoring your own services, they're automatically more comfortable purchasing that service.
That's true. And as Ed said, they get to know, like, and trust us. Mm-hmm. And then they call, and then we go right back up to authority building where they're already warmed up, and the sales process begins. But it's much shorter because he's taken the time to lay the groundwork. And he says it's actually, when landing new clients using his podcast, he says it's very, very comparable to getting a very warm referral from somebody.
Because that's exactly what it is.
In a roundabout sort of way, yeah. It is. Well, you're referring yourself, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. In
a sort of way. So, yeah, it's very interesting. It's I don't know how I'd actually run my business without a podcast. Somebody asked me that the other day. If you had to start over again, what would you do first?
You'd be working a lot more, I think.
Yeah, I'd start a podcast. First thing I'd do, I don't care what kind of business I was in. I could be running a little pub or an automotive shop or a search engine optimization company, or maybe I was a chiropractor. It doesn't matter what I was. The very first thing I would do is start a podcast to build an audience that I could communicate with personally.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that we're actually up against another short break. When we return, I'll ask James about his own experience landing new clients with his podcast. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
More Podcasting Mastery with James and Kimberly from the Secret Beach Hut Studio after this.
Is your podcast getting bogged down because of time or technical issues? Would you prefer to let someone else handle all of the production and technical details? Our virtual producer works remotely from a studio to provide you with production, technical, and creative assistance. Our virtual producer will call you and your guest by phone or Skype, and then record, produce, and upload each episode with SEO-friendly show notes to your website for automated distribution to social media and the major podcast directories. Sound intriguing? Visit podcastingmastery.com/virtual producer to learn more. That's www.podcastingmastery.com/virtual producer.
Now back to Podcasting Mastery from the Secret Beach Hut Studio.
Yes, I am here with my co-host James Martell, and we're talking about how business coaches and consultants can harness the power of a podcast to land new clients. So James, what's your personal experience been with landing new clients from your podcasting efforts?
Good question. Great question. And something that I've managed to feed a family with, actually.
A very large family.
Yeah, pretty large. 4 kids. They're all grown up now. Oldest 28, and then Justin's 27, 25, and 20. So the 2 youngest are girls, 2 oldest are boys, and now 3 little grandkids. So literally for the last 12 years, I've run our podcast, The Affiliate Buzz. For the last 6 or 7 years, it's been on webmasterradio.fm. We do it every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific. Of all of the marketing strategies that I've learned and followed and implemented for myself and taught to students and implemented for business owners, the most powerful marketing strategy that I've used is podcasting. It gives me the highest ROI. It's the easiest to produce, in my opinion, for content. It works for me in an evergreen sort of way, so you get a body of work out there and all these directories working for you on your behalf 24 hours a day, literally warming up prospects and then referring them back to the site or to my phone number where they give us a call. So experience-wise, from the podcast, we have sold probably, just to come up with some rough numbers, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but just in the area of website builds for clients, probably 150 to 175 sales, somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a piece. SEO services, probably in the area of between $2,000 and $4,000 a piece. All kinds of courses and tools and coaching services. It's been amazing. You're
talking millions of dollars now if you actually add those up.
Yeah, I would say so. Book sales, my ebook, when we launched The Buzz back in 2003, we sold that on the back end of the sale of my Affiliate Marketer's Handbook. And although we didn't have thousands of listeners back then, because we charged $10 a month to access the Affiliate Buzz, twice a month they get a new episode, 30 minutes in length. We'd have anywhere between 500 and 600 listeners a month for quite a few years, which added up to be around $330,000 in revenue. Helped selling the ebook, sold 5,500 copies of a $167 ebook. Although a lot of that came before the Buzz, because the Affiliate Buzz actually was an outgrowth from the handbook, where we discovered, hey, we need to be able to communicate with our students. Why don't we put together a little, what we called an audio newsletter back then, because podcasting didn't exist. So it's been amazing. It's been life-changing. It's allowed us to travel extensively, take the kids out of school for 3 weeks, much to the chagrin of their teachers. It's like, I don't care.
Yeah, going to school life. Forget it.
We're going to the Caribbean for 10 days, and then we're going to be in Disney World for a week, and then we'll be back in 21 days. So we're good with that.
Oh, that sounds like a decent life.
Yeah, and all kinds of that stuff. So it's podcast, and the podcast of all the things that I've done in the middle of it all. And the thing that I still do today that I did the same back then, which is probably the only thing, because there's been so much change online, the only thing that's been the constant has been the podcast.
Yeah, so. Longevity, definitely. Okay, we actually have to wrap up here pretty quick, James. I know you probably have a lot more to say, but if you could recommend a couple of episodes for our listeners to dig into.
Good question. Good idea. So I would recommend definitely the last episode with Ed Keay-Smith of the Business Marketing Show, who again said, my podcast changed the relationship I have with prospects and clients. And you can find that at podcastingmastery.com/PM013. And then, of course, 0 to 100,000 downloads in just 90 days was our podcast with Ellison Melody of the Food Heals podcast. And she laid that out, exactly how they grew their podcast from zero downloads to 100,000 downloads in 90 days. And you can find that at podcastingmastery.com/PM011.
And if you are a business coach or consultant and wondering what it takes to develop a profitable show of your own, James has put together a special report just for you, where he lays out the 12 core elements of a no-fail podcast. You can download it for free for a limited time at www.podcastingmastery.com/no-fail. And to our podcasting friends, a reminder, if you have your own podcast or podcasting tool that you would like us to feature here on the show, simply send us the details to feature me at podcastingmastery.com, and we may do exactly that.
And if there's something here that we mentioned that you missed, keep in mind we do take all the notes for you, and we will include in those links to the Business Marketing Show, links to the episode we talked about with Ellison Melody, and of course a link to the core elements of the No Fail podcast report. And you can find the show notes for this episode at podcastingmastery.com/PM014. Kimberly, thanks so much. And to all our podcasting friends, we'll catch you in the next episode of Podcasting Mastery.
Thanks for joining us in the Secret Beach Hut studio. If you are ready to start your podcasting adventure and to learn the secrets of creating a profitable podcast, James Martell has boiled it down for you to the 12 core elements of the No Fail podcast in his most recent free report. Available for a limited time at podcastingmastery.com/no-fail. But don't wait, this report won't be free for long. So be sure to grab your free copy today to learn the secrets of podcasting your way to a stress-free lifestyle at podcastingmastery.com/no-fail.